I'm Norman Varney of AV RoomService. I thought it would be good to speak a little bit about what I specialize in and why I'm passionate about it. So back when I was 3.5 years old, the Beatles performed on the Ed Sullivan Show, and it really impressed me. And the next day, my mom and my sister took me to the record store and bought I Want to Hold Your Hand. And on the flip side was I Saw Her Standing There. And so anyway, I've been hooked on music since, and I have been recording sounds and things, since I was really little. And I've been playing music, collecting records since I was really little too. And so before I think I was married, I amassed about 5,000 LPs. Before I was a teenager, when I was about like a preteen, in fact, even when I was 10, I had pretty good hi-fi equipment. And, first I just got hand-me-downs from my older brother and stuff. And then the family had an audiophile friend that lived out in Hollywood, and we would often visit, and he would show me his new latest piece. And one day I was attacked by his German Shepherd after dinner, and pulled my ear away from my head a bit. And he had earlier in the evening shown me his brand new Empire Troubadour Type 3 turntable. Big, massive, 2-piece platter, manual belt drive. And anyway, I was very impressed with that turntable. And as I was going to the hospital to get my ear reattached to my head, he pulled it out of his system and gave it to me. So that's when I started amassing some very good equipment. And like I say, I was 10 or 11 at that time. And so it's been, slowly upgrading since then, but I've always been into it for the music, not the equipment, but to reproduce the music as accurately as possible. And in order to do that, you need good equipment, but more importantly, you need to control the acoustics. And that's why I'm so passionate that's why I'm an acoustical engineer, is because I figured out early on that that's what it takes. You got to control the environment first before the equipment can perform to its potential. It's constantly a thing to this day that people are putting large amounts of money, big investments into their electronics and not thinking about the acoustics. And so you can never expect the performance capabilities out of that equipment if it's in a poor environment. And that's done most of the time. As a matter of fact, I'm going to quote something. This is a really good book, Get Better Sound by Jim Smith. I recommend it. And in here he says, I'd say that at least 95% of the sound, and he's talking about, he's gone to hundreds, if not thousands, of people's homes to help them set up their equipment. I'd say at least 95% of sounded mediocre at best. Honestly speaking, probably half of them could be described as having boring sound. Maybe 25% could best be described as, why do I feel better when the system is off? And I concur with Jim. More often than not, I'll see some really great equipment not set up right in a poor environment. So the system, meaning the electronics and the room, that is the system, because they work together. The sound propagates into the room from the speakers, and it reflects, it vibrates, it gets into the structure, it resonates, it rattles, it buzzes, all those kinds of things can occur in the room. And so the environment, and noise floor too, As a matter of fact, before you can even talk about sound quality, you have to get the noise floor under control. Noise meaning, yeah, buzzes and rattles, resonances and things like that from the structure, but also talking about, and those would be mechanical noises, but also flanking, noises from outside of the room getting in. And by the way, it's always a two-way street. What sound can get in, sound can get out. It could be electrical noises, a hum, switching noises going on. It could be even plumbing inside of the wall that makes noise. And so noise can be not only a distraction, but it can interfere. It can add to. Like resonant noises are going to be playing with the music and playing back later in time after the original signal has stopped. HVAC is another one. It's, sometimes it's all of a sudden the HVAC stops and you go, oh, you didn't even really realize that it was on until it stops. So all noises can be not only a distraction, but they can be an interference, and they can compete with the original sound, which is what you're after. So in my book, any unwanted vibrations, and noise is vibration, is not acceptable, or at least you need to get it under control. Unwanted vibrations would be anything other than the sound waves coming from the speaker, the original content, what the artist intended you to hear. That's it. So the thing about a regular, typical environment is that you're hearing mostly the room, unless you're near field. If you're really close to the speakers, then you're maybe not hearing most of the room. But if you're not, if you're typical, most of the sound you're hearing is reflected and reverberating and resonating or whatever from the room. So that's noise control. And then from a sound quality point of view, there's definitely a hierarchy that can be followed for good performance, good playback. So you've got a room, and it's probably not a dedicated space that you designed from scratch, and it's a room no matter what. Even if you did design it from scratch, it's going to have problems, and there's always going to be compromises and acoustic issues that you're going to have to deal with, and compromises that you're going to have to contend with. But however, you want to start with a good foundation, and so speaker listening positions within the room need to be optimized. Calibration of the equipment, meaning not only electrical calibration, but physical calibration, aiming of the speakers, and so forth. And in future videos, we'll get into these topics separately. Addressing first order reflections on the interior, reverberation times, and room modes. So we'll discuss those are the problems. We'll discuss solutions in later episodes. So while working at Owens Corning's Science and Technology Center on a R&D, we built two identical rooms, and these rooms were for research and development, and they were constructed as such that noise control was out of the picture, and they were built identically. The only difference was that one was going to be, the interior was going to have some Owens Corning acoustic treatment in it, and the other room was going to be left alone. These two rooms were built like a media room, so in other words, had a couple of couches, some tables, and a bookshelf, and so forth. Their dimensions were such that I designed them so that the room modes were distributed well and even, and so those weren't much of an issue either. Periodically, we would have VIPs come in, and I would have to explain the research that we're doing and so forth. And it was interesting to me as we would step out of one room and into the other room, one acoustically treated and the other one not. I would find that these individuals who did not have an audio background, didn't care really, found that the treated room was a great experience. In fact, it was constantly said, "I want this at home," and so it wasn't just me who understood and appreciated and had the background and experience to appreciate it. It was the average Joe, and so that got me to thinking that, okay, so everybody can appreciate this, and so I thought about it and decided to do kind of a jury analysis, a biofeedback jury analysis. So at Owens Corning, we had our own medical facility. We even had our own audiology room and staff. Every year at the Science and Technology Center, at this time there were about 500 people there, everyone had to have their hearing tested once a year. So I was able to set a criteria of hearing that I wanted to, a window to meet, and ask for volunteers to be subjects to this experiment. So after receiving, I think it was a couple of dozen of people that volunteered and met the hearing criteria, we had them strapped up to biofeedback analysis, so we could measure their heart rate, respiration, and sweat. I think that was it. And we would play a 7-minute clip of Das Boot. And we would let them cool down, take their measurements, and then measure them while they're watching the movie, and then cool down, and then take them into the other room and take their measurements again. So sometimes these people were experiencing the treated room first, sometimes second, but the end result was that those, except for one guy, they all experienced more they had more of an experience, more of an emotional experience in the acoustically treated room than in the non-acoustically treated room. So in other words, acoustics controlled their emotion and made the experience much better. And that was, to me, kind of a highlight in my career to make, to have data that supported my theory. It was because of that got my quest for developing acoustical products, and so I did that for Owens Corning and for Kinetics Noise Control, and started my own company too. The idea of getting as close to the artist as possible starts with the acoustics, and as far as components in the system, the room is it's always the most important component. It controls, it dictates, it drives the capabilities of everything else. So, if you have a lot of money and you're just buying expensive equipment hoping to get good results, you're just chasing your tail. Or if you're buying product of the month in search of audio nirvana, again, you're just chasing your tail, because unless you get the room under control, unless you can get the sound organized and so that it is following the same standards as the professionals do, and the room sounds neutral, so the room essentially is out of the equation, so that the room sonically disappears, you can't hope to know what you're doing as far as making changes to your audio. You can make changes and wonder, okay, it sounds different. Is it better or is it worse? And until you have the environment under control, you you can't say. Most of the things that we're going to talk about are pretty simple. Most of them are free too. And again, like I say, until you have your foundation in place, it's pretty hard to know how to make any improvements accurately, and it's pretty hard to expect improvements from better equipment and so forth as well. I would say those that want to hear differences between cables and so forth, small details really, until your environment until your setup and your room is under control, it's going to be really hard to hear those little nuances and experience a great soundstage, a deep, wide, three-dimensional soundstage. Things have to be set up right, and that's just driven by biology, the way we perceive. There's a lot of science involved in it. It's not. I suppose there's a little bit of art. There's some involved, but for the most part, it's science, and it's evolved pretty darn recently, and is still evolving as technology moves forward. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll come back for more and learn about how to optimize your setup.